turns into an obsession, your child is seeking control. And so when we look at the human behavior and where your child or your sensitive teen is stuck in this matter, where they are diving in and they're experiencing extreme tunnel vision, and it affects their schoolwork, it affects their ability to get their homework done, it affects their ability to have friends and to talk about a different topic or to even get together with their friends. It affects your ability to have a conversation about their chores or their responsibilities or just their day and get a word in edgewise about how their day went. And instead, they just lead straight with, when are we going back to Target? Are you going to be able to take me today? There's a level of pressure in how your child asks about the question. That is another sign that this is more of an obsession and definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. So when we look at why this big challenge is happening, parents will often instead focus on how do we get the challenge to stop. And you need to slow down. You need to break it down and understand more about why this is happening in order to appropriately and effectively guide your child's obsession back into the passion zone. Because again, you notice that for most of these interests for your child, and it might feel like whack-a-mole, it could have been, Lego last year, and this year it's dinosaurs or flip-flop, whatever. It depends on your kid's age and whatever is the flavor of the month. But what matters more is how driven your child is and whether or not they are able to be flexible in their interests. And that flexibility means that if they can't have what they want when they want it, that they know how to regulate their own emotions and move on. And that is the difference between over control and diving into an obsession and developmentally appropriate behavior. Now, sensitive kids who feel big emotions, this is true for teens or kids alike, right? Those big emotions don't have to lead to big behaviors. And if your child is screaming, yelling, kicking, having, on the floor meltdowns for 10, 20, 30, 90 minutes long because they can't go to Target that day to go get the toy they're obsessed with, or to another level of the toy, or get to another level of their game that they're interested in, or have you unlock or buy the in-app purchases, then this is a major challenge. And this is definitely something to be paying attention to. Now, when we think about parents whose kids are quite passionate, you might chalk this up to a leadership quality. And I really want to be very clear that there are some certain characteristics of this behavior that are actually much more concerning than you might think. And I want to cover how to address it and the do's and don'ts today. That's what we're going to do. Okay. So do's and don'ts to handling obsessions. Now that we know that this is draining, right? Because for you as a parent, you can experience a significant amount of frustration and exhaustion having the same conversation over and over and over again. We're not going to get to Target. No, because of XYZ, we got to go this way, and your brother needs this, and I already took you to Target, and I don't know when it's going to, Target's 25 minutes away, and we don't have that kind of time, or it's 25 miles away, and we can't drive 60 miles an hour to get there, depending on where you live, right? So the challenge that you could be having in this experience is not only feeling like you're beating a dead horse, having this conversation, but also the fact that your kid is beating a dead horse because they're not accepting no for an answer, right? And when you're trying to cultivate this passion, but it's in the obsession zone, it's really important to pay attention to it and to take action now, especially if your child's dealing with daily meltdowns. Cannot stress this enough. This is not a leadership quality if your child is dealing with daily meltdowns. This is a symptom of the meltdown or shutdown cycle. Now, if your teen is stuck on anime and they're not able to talk about anything else, they don't want to have a conversation with you, they're completely souped into YouTube and Instagram and drawing, and to the point where they can't communicate with you or meet their other expectations like school or getting together with their friends, then this is bordering in the obsession category as well. Even if they're not melting down, if they're isolating, that's a sign that this needs to be addressed too. Okay, so let's focus on don't number one. Okay, we're going to do the don'ts first so that we can focus on what to do more effectively. First and foremost, don't reassure. So what do I mean by that? I know that when your child, we'll go back to my dinosaur example, if your child can't have the dinosaur and whatever it is that, maybe it's a different toy that they're looking for, or they want to hunt Michaels for the certain model, etc. Go to the nearest AC Moore, if that's still around, or craft store, whatever. In those experiences for your child, if you can't make it to Hobby Lobby and your child starts to cry, it is really important that you're not diving into telling them that it's going to be okay, that they'll be okay with the number of dinosaur models that they have at home, with the number of Lego that they have at home, or eventually they'll figure out how to buy their own, right? In that moment, your child's emotions are so big and they don't believe that it's going to get better. So you're actually driving a bigger wedge if you're reassuring your child that everything's going to be okay. They won't believe you, and it'll be a bigger problem. And this is true for teenagers as well, especially for teenagers, but sensitive kids don't benefit from reassurance either. Next thing is not to ignore it, right? So if telling your kid it's going to be better and everything will be fine, even if they don't get what they want, doesn't work, it's also important not to tune them out, right? Because what happens when you have something on your mind and you really need to talk to somebody about it, and they look at you and then they turn their head and they either pull up their phone, which I'm not implying that you're doing, but, I'm just thinking adult to adult. They pull up their phone, or they stick their head in the fridge, or they ask you, hey, what do you want for dinner? And you're trying to talk to them about the fact that you had a big issue with your boss and you really need to figure out a solution to your issue with your boss, and they completely ignore you. How do you feel? Even if this is the second time you brought up the issue with your boss, even if you tried to solve this issue with your boss for the last 90 days and you've been talking to your friend about it for like almost every other day, and they ignore you, what happens? What happens? How do you feel, right? Notice that, because your child or your teen is going to feel the same thing. You're going to feel like crap. Really, that's what ignoring does. It makes you feel like crap, makes you feel like, in no uncertain terms, that you don't matter. And that's not what you want your child to experience. So if you're ignoring, I want to acknowledge that there's no judgment here. If you're tired, if you're fried, if you heard this conversation a million times, it is very easy to say, kid, asked and answered. I'm all done having this conversation, right? So if that's happening in your home, pay attention. It's really important to notice what to do differently instead. All right, next is don't talk your kid out of liking the preference, right? Now, this is really important. It's more common for parents of younger children, but if you're parenting in elementary, middle school, or above aged child, you are not immune, so stay tuned, okay? But this is more common for parents of younger children because it stems along the lines of distracting your child from their needs. Now, when your child is very little, like baby or toddler age, when they're really focused on something and they can't have it, like say, for example, they want to, you're at a friend's house and the older child has a bike and your 2-year-old wants to get on it and it's not safe, right? But they're super focused on wheels at that point. At 2, you might say, hey, let's look over here. Let's pay attention to, this little car that you can ride. That distraction technique might have worked for you in that moment, right? Because at that point, your child could have been more able to move from one thing to the next. Their attention span just developmentally is shorter per their expectations, right? So if that was a strategy that worked for your child when they were very little, then it makes sense that you would try it when your child is older, but it's really important to stay away from that distraction technique. Now, I say technique because sometimes young children need to be distracted out of their focus in order to pay attention to what you need them to pay attention to. So it can be relevant in parenting young children. It could also be a survival tactic if you try to get your child to focus on something else and you're trying to move their attention, right? But what we're talking about here is, an example when you're at home and your child is asking a question a million times and you've had enough, or you've tried to answer the question, or you've tried to solve it in the ways we just addressed, and you're using distraction as another thing in your toolbox. So distraction would look like cracking a joke. Distraction would look like saying, you don't really need another dinosaur. You have 6, you don't need 7. And why don't you focus more on Legos instead of dinosaurs, right? Why don't you go play with these? Or why don't you go deal with the dinosaurs that you have now and go play with those? That is also a distraction. If you're trying to solve the problem for your child in that moment, that is also a distraction, because what's driving their issue at this point is their emotions, right? It's not their logic that they have to have a certain thing, and the rules apply here, okay? The rules to life apply here. And so when you're stuck on trying to help them stop being stuck on having an object or experiencing something, it's really important to notice that this is a skill set that your child is trying to figure out how to navigate. Now, we've been speaking about the fact that the flip side of an obsession, the healthy part of an obsession, is when you stay in the passion zone, right? So we don't want to discourage your child by trying to move them onto a different topic. Instead, you need to shape them on what's appropriate and what's effective. So and where the limits are, because as life goes on, we might want some certain things, and we might feel like what we want is unattainable. And there are certain experiences that we need to persevere in order to get what we want. And then there are other circumstances that we need to accept reality and notice that we're not going to get what we want, right? So as an adult, if we are yelling at the red light, it's not going to turn green faster, right? So that's an experience where we need to accept reality. We might try to talk our way out of a speeding ticket and talk to the police officer and say, you know what, I don't really know why the speed limit is 60 miles an hour here on this highway. It really should be 70. So, can I just ask for you to make it 70? That also is not going to work, right? So there's experiences as an adult where we're going to need to accept reality, and trying to argue or negotiate our way out of it isn't going to work, especially if you talk to a police officer like that. They are going to make the same assumptions that you might be making with your child in that moment, that they're entitled, that they're spoiled, that they, need to be able to deal with it, right? And all of those lead to over-punishment often because you're frustrated and exhausted because, again, when we speak about this issue, if your child is acting like a dog with a bone who is tunnel vision and focused, then it can really come out quite forceful in their intensity, right? They must have it. They have to have it. They might use words like that pre-meltdown or during their meltdown. And that can really impact the way that you handle your child's emotions and handle your own emotions in that moment. So we want to acknowledge what you're doing to add to the problem so that you can eliminate that behavior yourself. Now, when we think about being able to break down this cycle, it's really important to understand the skills that your child needs to build, right? Your child needs to stay curious. Your child needs to stay focused on learning. Your child needs to feel capable of solving their problems creatively. And so if you're distracting them out of wanting of even prioritizing this problem, that's also not going to fix the problem, right? They're going to feel like they shouldn't have that interest or this problem at all. And as a result, especially sensitive children and sensitive teens who are more prone to shame, that sends them right back into the shame spiral, self-criticism, self-doubt, and depression and anxiety at worst. So what are you supposed to do? Let's focus on our do's now, okay? Do notice how you're getting in your child's way from experiencing that disappointment, right? So we just talked about several ways to solve your child's emotions for them by trying to solve the problem. Now, if you're trying to get your child to feel better, this isn't going to work, right? It's not going to work. Your child is stuck, and your child needs to be able to regulate their emotions about being stuck rather than try to find a reason why they shouldn't be stuck in the first place. Okay, so you need to be able to help your child deal with that disappointment. Next is you need to be able to notice how your child is dealing with those big emotions, and you need to be able to notice how you're trying to solve them by walking on eggshells, by trying to solve all of their problems for them, right? So if you are running from target to target because you don't think your kid can handle not getting the latest version of their or the latest level of their interest, then that is really important to change that behavior, because not only does it perpetuate the problem by, keeping you frustrated and keeping you stuck in dealing with the meltdowns that are going to happen inevitably later in some other moment, some other experience, but it also doesn't give your child the ability to regulate their own emotions. It doesn't help them solve their problems. It keeps them feeling incapable of solving their own problems. And knowing that you've been trying all of these years to help your child learn how to solve all of their problems, it's really important that we are taking a good look at how part of the challenge is in how you're solving the issue in the first place. The next thing that we want to do is pay attention to how you're creating those opportunities for your child to build those skills, right? Your child needs to be able to hear the word no. They need to be able to tolerate that. And it also requires you to deliver that in a way that helps them build those skills, right? So you'd be able to get their interests and needs met. So again, going back to not telling them that they shouldn't have their interests, but supporting them in staying interested and having boundaries around that, okay? And then it's important to teach your child to accept reality, right? So there goes the boundaries and where the challenge is for your child or your teen. If you're parenting an 8-year-old who is super focused on getting a dirt bike, then it's really important to help them understand that you might have certain safety rules that or you might live in a neighborhood where that just simply isn't available for them as an option, and they will need to manage that and to deal with the fact that they can't count down the days until they're 10, and spend the next 2 years zoned in and unhappy, waiting until they're 10 till they maybe can go to like a dirt bike riding place or something. I don't know. If you're trying to solve the problem in that way and it's available to them, right? So it's really important to understand that this is going to be relevant for your child no matter what their age, right? If your child has a passion and then they turn it into tunnel vision and they are not able to regulate the intensity of their interest, then that is a symptom of the meltdown cycle. Children who are dealing with daily meltdowns do not know how to regulate their emotions, and they don't know how to do it across the board. This means in multiple situations of their life. Now, you might see major meltdowns in only one scenario, but it's really important. One scenario meaning maybe you only see meltdowns at home, right? Maybe your child only has meltdowns at school. If your child is sensitive, it doesn't matter where those meltdowns are happening. If they're happening on a regular, daily, multiple times a day, or every other day basis, even multiple times a week, depending on the age, this is very important to understand. You are still stuck in that cycle, and that is not going to go away no matter their age. The core skill set that your child needs to learn is to regulate their emotions, and that is something they need to be able to call up at any time and be able to do that in any scenario, because if they're not doing it at every avenue of their life, then it will leak out in other avenues, right? It's a sinking ship scenario. Now, for sensitive teens, this is going to play out in the sense that if they don't get what they need, they shut down. They close the door to opportunity. They close the door to relationship, and they close with you and with their friends. And they might close the door to their interests and their creativity as well. And sensitive teens might end up in a completely different career trajectory, even if they're talented, if they don't know how to creatively solve their problems and deal with parameters and reality around what's available to them in that season of life and in that age, and especially if it's inhibiting their ability to do their schoolwork, right? And to focus on their other responsibilities. You might need to set boundaries around it for that purpose. And that can lead to a sensitive team, especially, to completely shut down and turn it off and just say, you know what, screw it, I'm over this. And it's not worth the excitement. Now, that obviously is not something that you want your teen to go from complete black passion to complete white shutdown, right? Or vice versa, if you want to use the colors to match the imagery here. But what we're talking about is the black and white thinking, the all or nothing perspective, that I either need to be all in and get everything I want or do nothing at all, right? And that same perspective is happening across the lifespan for sensitive people when they don't have those skills. You might, if you're a sensitive parent, notice this in yourself if you've struggled with emotion regulation. And so when we work with our clients and we shift them out of this pattern, that kiddo that I mentioned earlier today was dealing with this big emotion and feeling like it needed to be, go all in or focus on it until I can get it and be disappointed for the next 6 months until I think I'll get it for Christmas. And the biggest fear that one of the parents had, especially being a highly sensitive person herself, is that she didn't think she would last with her energy and her current skill set. So we had to work on both of them and teach through the parent, the child, the skills, but first comes you, right? So mom knew she needed to learn skills to not go straight to everything is awesome or everything is awful as well. So it's very important to understand that if your child is stuck in this negotiation to the point where they're beating a dead horse, I alluded to this before, but I really want to make sure that we're covering this in depth right now. This is not a life skill. Beating a dead horse is not a life skill. This is a symptom of an inability to deal with disappointment, frustration, anger, and anxiety. And it's an over control symptom. Now, this is really, really important because if you see this quality in your child and you say, you know what, all I need to do is redirect that behavior. That behavior is going to get my kid into law school. That behavior is going to get my kid into performing at the highest law firm. And whether you're a lawyer or you value law at all is well, hopefully you value law a little bit, but like value studying law, the fact that your kid's a lawyer is neither here nor there. It's your perception that we're talking about here, that's a skill set that's going to play out for your child in an effective way. And so I really want to break down that myth because it is simply not true. A child who wants what they want when they want it and they will not stop until they get it is not a child who will be able to perform effectively in their career. Now, I want to break this down because we work with teens, we work with young adults, and we work with adults who struggle with mental health as well, especially in the private practice. But when we think about the coaching clients that we work with, and they're teens, these are teens who have dealt with this pattern for quite some time, wanting what they want when they want it and not being able to deal with it when they don't get it, and then they shut down. So younger children might have dealt with this with meltdowns and intensity. As they age, they just start dulling themselves to and numbing themselves to the challenge. And so that blows back up in adulthood if you don't solve it in adolescence. And so when we look at this challenge throughout the lifespan, let's take the lawyer for example, right? If you're like, okay, you know what, we just gotta muscle through adolescence, muscle through childhood, muscle through adolescence, and my kid will figure out how to make this work when they're an adult. It is really important that you don't let that drive how you parent your kid. I'm not going to say it. I don't know how to say it again. I'm just going to say it the same way again. It is really important that you not let that perspective drive how you parent your child, because people who are dogs with a bone in this way in adulthood become the people who push people down in order to get to the top. They become the people who burn bridges if they don't get what they want. They become the people who are unmanageable, who keep getting fired. They become the people who, at best, burn themselves out before they reach to the top. They overwork and overplease. And if they are so focused on meeting their goals and they have some social skills, right, they can turn into doormats in the sense that they just do whatever they need to do to get the company outcome. And then they become workaholics. And so it's really, really important to understand how this challenge starts in childhood. Because when you look at adult behavior and the patterns of adult behavior and tunnel vision and hyperfocus and dog with a bone mentality, that mentality is a skill set. And I say that with air quotes, I guess. It's a skill set that is built in childhood. And it's not a quality that meets goals consistently. Instead, you only get a piece of the outcome. This is a person, somebody who performs like that in their career is likely to develop significant issues in their health. They either deprioritize their health or they push themselves too hard, right? Because it's all or nothing thinking going on, which means they, if it's the first issue, then they might deal with heart disease, they might deal with high blood pressure, or they might have a really hard time with their with healthy eating in terms of paying attention to their health because they're so focused on the outcome of whatever it is that they're interested in. Now, this is somebody who we speak about who would be considered, high performing or successful in their career. But again, it's the type of success that gets you, a TV drama where it's like the dude who's like actually the villain, right? Or the one that has to have a major breakdown and they lose all their relationships in order to finally hit rock bottom and then decide that the way that they live their life is something that's not worth living. And so then they have to go to therapy for years to turn it around, or completely turn off their desires and then go to go do silent retreats for years to finally tune inside, right? So when we think about being able to shift out of this dynamic, it's a much easier pattern to break when your child is young, especially for highly sensitive kids, than when your child is an adult. So it's really crucial when we speak with our clients, especially, they all value early intervention. They all notice the research for human development that when you catch it early, you are able to more effectively break down the patterns in the brain, which is where you see those faster results. So we see parents and we talk to parents who are like, how are you going to be able to turn this around in 10 weeks? We just use science to turn that around. It's not a magic pill. There's a lot of work that goes into play, but it's all research backed. So what do you need to do, right? We talked about what to do in this moment, what not to do in this moment when your child has an obsession. But what do you need to do to actually systematically turn it around, right? We need to be able to eliminate that tunnel vision that leads to the meltdowns. And you need to do that with a strategy. Hands down, there has to be a recipe to follow, because if you are stuck in this, then you need to be able to manage all sorts of the factors, right? One of the factors we already discussed at length is how you might be getting in your own way of solving this problem, how you might be shooting yourself in the foot, metaphorically, and how you might be contributing to the problem by solving the issue at hand in front of you, but that's actually creating a bigger problem down the road or leading to a meltdown later in the day. So that's the first things first, is we always address that issue. So you need to be able to turn that around. Secondly, is you need to be able to communicate in a way that is fun and playful, because children learn through play. Now, if your child is super focused on getting what they want when they want it, it is extremely hard to get them to focus in a way that is curious and playful, right? So that's really important to notice, because at that point, they are in tunnel vision, probably pretty frustrated that they're not getting a yes out of you right away. Or the yes is coming, 6 months down the road, and they have to deal with 6 months of no, they can't have it, right? So that's really important to pay attention to. And then lastly is you need to be able to support your child in changing their behavior. And that has to happen in a way that doesn't perpetuate shame, right? We spoke about that earlier today. Not making your child wrong for having an interest, or making your child or dismissing the interest. And the same goes for your teen, even if you don't relate to it, right? Maybe as a teen you were more into sports and your kid's more into anime, whatever. It's really important that we don't identify this as a bad thing for your teen or your child. So those 4 points are very easy to break down when you follow a simple strategy. Now, does it include hard work? Absolutely. Of course, parenting is hard. So you just need to pick your hard. And then it's a matter of being able to make it a heck of a lot easier, simpler, to systematically turn it around and end the meltdown cycle, right? So if you're coming to us and you're listening in because you're dealing with meltdowns on a daily basis, then sure, turning this around would be hard, but what's the alternative, right? Watching your kid suffer for the rest of their childhood, watching your kid feel incapable of solving their problems creatively for the rest of their childhood, that's not what you want. You've been trying to solve this problem on your own for a very long time, even if you didn't realize your kid was sensitive till just now. You've been trying to turn this around for a really long time, because what parent signs up to have kids and dreams of their child suffering, right? Obviously, you're listening in because you want to break down the meltdown cycle. But it's really important to understand that even if those meltdowns have only been happening for 6 months, maybe even a year, and your child is 8, you might have 7 years of references thinking that your child could grow out of it because they didn't used to have it. But it's really important to understand that you've been trying to lead your child so that they regulate their emotions since you welcome them into your family, right? So when we look at this challenge from the bigger perspective of how long you've been trying to prevent this pattern in the first place, and then how long you've been trying to end this pattern since it started, it's really critical to understand that this requires an outside perspective. Solving this problem requires an outside help. Highly sensitive children are 1 of 5, right? 1 of every 5. That's 20%. That means that the majority of what you're trying to apply, the majority of parenting research, the majority of parenting approaches don't apply. And regardless of how long you've been trying to parent your child, understanding the fact that your child is sensitive, if what you're doing isn't working, then there are a lot of different factors that you need to take into consideration in order to turn this around. So if my team can help you, then go ahead and book a call. We'll have a conversation about whether or not we can do that, right? I don't know if we can help you specifically. That's why we have a conversation with every single family that we invite into the program, because otherwise, if a different fit is more appropriate, or if we're not a match based on where you guys are struggling and what your goals are, then it's really important that we pay attention to what you need to do, and we will send you in the right direction with the right plan. Thank you, and have a good day.